Hello, today we're going to be talking about social awareness. Social awareness is simply paying attention to the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the people we interact with. And we actually do this automatically. We're always in our mind, it's called theory of mind. We're always automatically guessing at the thoughts and the emotions of other people. So if you have a pet, like my cat, my cat's got trials and tribulations, man. He's got hopes and dreams. If you sit down and talk to me about my cat, I can tell you all about my cat's life, right? If you've ever seen a cat's brain, they're actually quite tiny. And a lot of what I perceive as my cat's personality is probably just me making stuff up, right? I'm attributing thoughts and feelings to him that don't actually exist. And we do this all the time, and we do it so much. We kind of overdo it, and we always guess at the thoughts and feelings of things, even if it doesn't really make sense to do. So you looking at that roof, you probably think like, oh, that is a sleepy, lazy, or maybe like a suspicious roof. I don't know. But we see emotion there, right? Or the security camera guy. He's like a nervous security camera with a laser gun about to shoot someone, right? We make up emotions and we project them onto things. And because we're doing this all the time, because we're doing it automatically, we don't always do it totally accurately. But we can improve that. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how do we accurately perceive the thoughts and feelings of other people? How do we understand what people are really experiencing? How do we make sure that these automatic processes are working in the most accurate way that they can? We'll talk about three ways to improve, or honestly, three things that kind of challenge our ability to accurately perceive people. So we'll talk about stereotypes, which are behavioral expectations based on superficial characteristics, halo effect, primary attribution error, and confirmation bias, and how those things skew our perception of others. And then we'll talk about display rules and how people are kind of covering up their true emotions most of the time, and so it makes it difficult to accurately understand how people feel. And we'll begin by talking about stereotypes. Stereotypes are overly simplistic expectations of people based on one superficial characteristic or a set of superficial characteristics. It's basically, we assume that everyone who has a certain characteristic thinks or acts or behaves or feels in the same way. In grad school, I did a lot of research on older adults, and there's a lot of stereotypes about older adults, that they're slow learners, that they don't understand technology, that they're sick and grumpy all the time. So we have all these stereotypes of older adults. And of course, there's a diverse range of older people, just like there's a diverse range of younger people. But that is what a stereotype is. It's when we assume something about people based on a superficial characteristic. Stereotypes are functional. There's a reason that human beings evolved to have stereotypes. If I have a stereotype that all tigers are dangerous and I avoid all tigers, that's probably going to be a good stereotype. Now, there might be a couple tigers out there somewhere in the world that are not dangerous, that are like really friendly and just want to they're stalking me through the jungle because they want to hang out. They need the company. They want to nuzzle with me. But if I go up to every single tiger and try to figure out, is this a dangerous one or a friendly one, that's not going to turn out well for me. I'm going to get eaten and mauled, right? And so in our evolutionary past, and even still today, stereotypes make sense in a lot of situations and for a lot of reasons. But stereotypes are by definition limited. They're expanding upon a superficial characteristic, and they're often wrong or incomplete. When I was in grad school, my girlfriend was 6'3", so very tall. And when we first started dating, people would come up to her in public and they'd be like, "Oh, do you play basketball? Do you play volleyball?" And she'd always be like, "No!" And she'd be really rude to him. And I was like, "Why are you being so mean?" And she'd be like, "I hate those people." And then after we've been dating for like a year or two, and this happened constantly, people would come up to her and I'd be like, "No, she doesn't play sports." Because it just gets so annoying when people are assuming they understand this thing about you or they know this thing about you based on a single characteristic, which in this case was not even accurate. So stereotypes can be functional, but they can also be very limited. The problem with stereotypes, or one of the many problems with stereotypes, is that they strongly influence our ability to experience empathy. So when we're talking about making social connections, influencing people, persuading people, giving people feedback, these are all at some level based on empathy and understanding the emotions of other people. And stereotypes, by putting other people into a category that is usually separate from your own, right? That a stereotype is a characteristic that makes you distinctly different from me in some way, that impairs my ability to connect to you as another human being. And they actually did a study, to understand how powerful this is, they did a study with first-year medical residency students. And so these are people that are educated, they're diverse, they're probably most of them are probably liberal-minded people. And these people reported on a survey that Black people experience less pain than white people, that Black people don't feel pain in the same way that white people do. And so here you have a population of educated people, intelligent people, and their stereotype about Black people has actually impaired their ability to empathize with them, right? That they are this other that doesn't experience the world like I do. And so stereotypes can really cause distinctions, cause us to perceive distinctions with other people when no such distinction exists. And if you're wondering, that is absolutely not true. Black people feel pain the same level as white people do. And so you always have to be very careful. We see this in politics. Trump has been doing this a lot recently when he's talking about immigrants. There's this strong effort to dehumanize them, right? We talk about them in terms other than human, which makes our behavior towards them more acceptable. So calling them animals. Before that, it was illegal aliens, right? Which is still this kind of dehumanizing term. And so it's trying to take away people's empathy towards this group of people by describing them in ways that are non-human. And so if you were to hear that, half a dozen children had died in federal custody because, of the flu and access to basic medicine and food and cleanliness, you'd be horribly in uproar about that. But if you hear that half a dozen immigrants, half a dozen of these animals died in custody, then you don't have that, people don't have that same reaction. And so stereotypes and this dehumanizing language is a way to undermine empathy towards people. Stereotypes powerfully influence how we interpret behavior. So there are a ton of studies showing that if a Black man and a white man perform the same behavior, whether it's like standing too close to someone or using a loud voice or things like that, when a Black man does it, it will be perceived as hostile, aggressive, and violent. Whereas when the white person does it, it isn't perceived as strongly in those ways. And so the mere fact that it's a Black person performing those behaviors, we have stereotypes about Black people in our culture, and so it influences how we interpret behavior. And of course, we see that in all the police killings of Black men, where when a white man goes for his wallet, that is not perceived as threatening, but when a Black man goes for his wallet, it's like, oh, is it a gun? Is it a knife? Is it a weapon? It's that same behavior, but because of our stereotypes, it's perceived more violently. And so there's a strong influence on how we interpret other people's behavior based on our stereotypes of them. We also judge people by the extent to which their stereotype aligns with whatever role they're in. So in American culture, women are stereotyped as emotional and nurturing and subservient, whereas men are stereotyped as bold, powerful, decisive. Now, if we were to put someone in a leadership position, when we think of leaders, there's much more overlap between our stereotypes of men and what we expect of leaders. So leaders are supposed to be bold and decisive, just like men are. There's much less of a overlap between the behaviors we expect of women and the behaviors we expect of leaders. And so when women are put in a leadership position, they are usually either the perception of them is usually negative if they act in ways that are expected of leaders, because that contradicts what we expect of women. And if they act in ways that are expected of women, then that contradicts what we expect of leaders. And so when a woman is in a leadership position, they're often criticized for being either too leader-like and not fulfilling their gender expectations, or to quote woman-like and not fulfilling their leadership role expectations. And so the stereotypes we have of people influence how we perceive them and how we perceive how effective they are at the jobs that they do. So that's stereotypes. Stereotypes are behavioral expectations based on a superficial characteristic. That's one of the things that skews our ability to accurately see people, because we have these preconceptions of them based on our stereotypes of them. There are three other biases that we have as human beings that really influence our ability to accurately assess people: halo effect, primary attribution error, and confirmation bias. We'll talk about all those. So halo effect is when we overgeneralize positive traits. If someone has one positive trait, we tend to assign a lot of other positive traits to them. Maybe this probably happened to you in high school when you started dating someone and you're like, oh my God, they're so smart and they're so funny and they're so cute. And then you dated them for 3 or 4 months and you realize, like, oh no, they're just cute. And you had like made up these other positive qualities, assigned these other positive qualities to them because you generalized. You were like, well, they're good looking, so they must be funny, they must be smart. That's what halo effect is. We often have halo effect with people that are attractive, also with people that are smart. We tend to overgeneralize those positive qualities. The opposite of this is horn effect. Horn effect is when we overgeneralize negative traits. And we often do this with people that we dislike. So if you have a coworker or a classmate and you really dislike them as a person, you're probably likely to disagree with them about certain things, right? Or to think that they have bad ideas, to be dismissive of their ideas. And just because you don't like someone doesn't mean they don't have good ideas, but you're assuming whatever quality about them you don't like, you're transferring that, you're overgeneralizing that to the other parts of their personality. Another bias that impairs our ability to accurately perceive people is something called primary attribution error. Primary attribution error means that when someone does something, I attribute that behavior to them as a human being, and I usually don't take I'm usually not as thoughtful about the situation and how the situation might have influenced their behavior. So for example, if I'm meeting with someone for the first time and they show up 10, 15 minutes late, my attribution is that that there's something about them as a person, right? That they're lazy, that they're rude, that they're disorganized. I'm attributing that lateness to some characteristic of them. Of course, when I'm 10 or 15 minutes late for a meeting, it's because, there was really bad traffic that I wasn't expecting, or something happened in the morning that got me going late, or whatever it was, that I look to the situation to explain that behavior. Whereas with other people's behavior, I assign that to their will, to who they are as a human being. And that's what we call primary attribution error, is erroneously more strongly associating people's behavior with them as a person and overlooking the situational influences on behavior. Primary attribution error interacts with stereotypes in such a way that when someone acts in ways that contradict our stereotype of them, we'll look to aspects of the situation to explain away those behaviors. So, for example, Brock Turner sexually assaulted another student when he was a student at Stanford. And this is someone who, is obviously educated, successful, at least academically, is a student athlete, is white, is from a relatively affluent family. And so that contradicts our culture's stereotype. That behavior contradicts our stereotype of, this good, hardworking student athlete. And so when the judge, who only gave him 6 months, which is an incredibly light sentence, was basically like, hey, this is a good kid. And then he attributed this awful behavior to aspects of the situation, right? So he was drunk, he was at a party, he had just gotten to college. It wasn't him. It wasn't him as a person that did this. It was these aspects of the situation that influenced his behavior. And by doing that, he was able to maintain this positive stereotype he had of people like Brock Turner. This is why you should be incredibly wary of first impressions. Whenever people say, "Oh, I'm really good at first impressions. I'm really good at sizing people up right away," I'm always like, "Are you though? Like, you're probably not that great at it, and you probably jump to conclusions, not because you're not really insightful or perceptive as a person, but just that to really understand people, one meeting or one exposure is not enough, that we have to see people in a variety of different situations in order to understand who they really are as people." And one of the big problems is that we meet people, we have a first impression of them, we have primary attribution error, stereotype threat, all these things, and we jump to certain conclusions about who they are as a person. And then this thing called confirmation bias kicks in. And confirmation bias is the tendency of people to look for information that confirms what we already believe. Once we believe something to be true, we shape our world in a way to support that belief. So these are our beliefs. Here's the evidence in support of our beliefs, and we tend to focus on this part here, the overlap between what we believe and what the evidence says. What we should do to understand people more accurately and really just to understand the world more accurately is to constantly challenge our beliefs by looking for evidence that contradicts our beliefs. And if you believe something really strongly, then you should seek out evidence that contradicts your belief. Because if you can't find that evidence, then great, your belief was right. And if you can, then you should start to question your belief of things. And so it's really important to keep an open mind when we're trying to figure out who people are and why they do the things they do. So far, we've talked about stereotypes, which are behavioral expectations based on superficial characteristics. We've talked about biases that we have, halo effect, primary attribution error, confirmation bias that skew how we perceive others. The last thing we'll talk about that influences our ability to accurately perceive other people is something called display rules. And display rules make it difficult to see which emotion people are authentically experiencing. Display rules govern who can express which emotions, how, and when. And especially in the United States, there's really powerful display rules about like wait staff and customer service. Like when you go into a restaurant in the United States, they like pretend they're your friend, right? They're like, "Oh, hello, where would you like to see? Or where would you like to sit tonight? We're so glad to see you." And they have this big smile on their face and they're really friendly. And if a waiter or waitress gets upset at a customer, there's not allowed to like be mean to them or yell at them or even to express that frustration, right? There's a rule governing their ability to authentically express how they're feeling, and they have to wear this kind of plastic smile all the time, whether that's what they're feeling or not. So at a very basic level, that's what display rules are. Sometimes display rules dictate that we exaggerate our emotions. So when your boss tells a joke, whenever anyone in a position of authority over you tells a joke, you might find yourself laughing a little harder than like is actually merited, right? And that's because that's one of the display rules, that we exaggerate positive emotions around authority figures. And so we can hear ourselves laughing too loudly at this joke that isn't that funny. And we're like, we don't like this about ourselves, right? We're like, oh, all right, tone it down. And yet it's just kind of this natural reaction because of these display rules that say we should exaggerate that. Sometimes display rules dictate that we minimize our emotions. So if we ever get really upset or stressed out at work, we can't just start crying, right? Or that's frowned upon in American culture, that we're supposed to keep a stiff upper lip and kind of keep ourselves in check, keep calm when we're at work. So some of the time, display rules say, hey, we need to minimize your emotional expression. Sometimes display rules dictate that we substitute one emotion for a different emotion. So we have an emotional reaction that is inappropriate, and so we have to substitute it with an emotional reaction that is appropriate. This happens like sometimes, a coworker, a classmate, someone will get like a really awful haircut. I mean, just like really awful. And when you see them, you have this like, your first response is just shock. You have this look of shock on your face, right? And then you immediately go, oh my God, I love it, right? Because the real emotional experience is like, oh man, you look horrible, and that's inappropriate. Display rules say that, depending on how close you are with the person, that you can't express that. So we substitute our shock for delight, which of course sucks for the other person because they're walking around thinking everyone loves their horrible new haircut. Display rules are strongly influenced by culture. I lived in China for a year, and in Chinese culture, they're less comfortable displaying emotions in public in general, especially negative emotions like anger. And one time, one of the other teachers that I worked with got really upset at our boss, who was Chinese, and the other teacher was American, the boss was Chinese, and the teacher just flips out and is just like screaming and yelling at my Chinese boss in front of like other people, like clients and customers and everything. And my boss, you could tell, was just so uncomfortable, and her emotional reaction from an American perspective was just so confounding. And she just like pretended nothing was wrong, right? She's like, okay, we'll get it figured out, don't worry. And like just this utter reluctance to express the anger and the frustration that she almost certainly must have been feeling, right? And of course, in America, a boss would never put up with that. A boss would respond with the same level of anger and criticism almost always. And so that's one example. If you've ever been traveling, if you've ever lived in a different culture, you know that one of the most difficult parts of being in a different culture is understanding these display rules. Display rules are also strongly influenced by gender. So kind of the most obvious example of this is boys don't cry, right? That I remember being taught from a very young age that it wasn't okay for me to cry. And that was like my parents teaching me that, like my mom and my dad teaching me that. That was the teachers at school telling me that, giving me that information. That was my peers making fun of the other boys that did cry. And so society at large from a very young age taught me that it wasn't okay. It's not okay for boys to cry. And I have two sisters, and they were not taught that same information, right? I mean, certainly they weren't like encouraged to go around crying, but they had much more latitude in regard to that than I did. Alternatively, women are often dismissed for being overly emotional, and actually the word hysterical comes from the root word, the Greek word for uterus, and it was this idea that like women are crazy and emotional. And so they've done a lot of studies showing that doctors are often like very dismissive of when women come in complaining of like subjective symptoms like pain and that type of thing. Doctors are often very dismissive because they think they're just being over dramatic. And they will incorrectly diagnose them with like a psychological disorder like anxiety or depression or something like that when they actually have a true physical medical problem. Because it's just this idea that well, when women go over the top, they're, you know how emotional women can be. Display rules are also influenced by ethnicity. So we talked earlier about how in the United States, black men are often perceived as more violent than white men, even if they're doing the same things and acting in the same way. And so within black culture, men sometimes learn to turn down their anger and their expression of that because they know that's going to be misinterpreted in society at large. And you can see YouTube videos of black parents teaching their children how to interact with police in a way where they can't be perceived as threatening, right? Because and at a young age, teaching children that they can express those emotions. It's not safe to express those emotions. Display rules are heavily influenced by hierarchy and power. In general, the person with the most power in the room is the one who gets to set the emotional tone in the room, and they're also the person that has the most freedom to authentically express their emotion. That we almost always follow the emotional lead of the person in charge. They can emotionally express whatever they want, and then we kind of just have to match their emotions most of the time. When we learn these display rules from a young age, it not only impairs our ability to express these emotions, but it can actually impair our ability to fully experience them. So one thing I learned growing up was not just that it wasn't okay to cry in public, it was that it wasn't okay to feel sad. It wasn't okay to have that feeling that made me want to cry. And so it wasn't just about displaying it, it was about experiencing it. Now, of course, as a human being, I experience sadness and loss and disappointment and all these other things that make me cry. And yet at a young age, I started kind of not to be aware of those things or to try to push those things out of my awareness because I felt that it was unacceptable for me to experience those emotions. So display rules not only influence how we express our emotions, they influence how we experience them. The crazy thing about display rules is that they're not actually rules. There's no law anywhere that talks about which emotions we can express and when. They're just norms. They're just social norms. They're just social expectations. Now, that's not to say they're not real. Social norms are real and have a strong influence on our behavior, and there are real consequences for violating social norms. But those norms are not as restrictive as they appear to be. And we actually have a lot more leeway with our emotional expression than we're sometimes aware of. And I would encourage you guys to push emotional expression, to push authenticity, to challenge display rules. I mean, not for the sake of doing it, but in situations where you think it would be beneficial to do that, push it and see what the reaction gets. And sometimes you can do things like that to inspire people, to connect to people, to get authenticity with people by breaking through those unspoken display rules. Today we talked about social awareness being the ability to accurately perceive other people, and we talked about things that challenge our ability to accurately perceive other people. So stereotypes, for example, halo effect, primary attribution error and confirmation bias, and then display rules. And all of these things make it more difficult to get an accurate perception of what people are thinking and feeling. We've talked a lot about what we shouldn't do. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what we should do. And to accurately perceive people, what you want to do is develop a multifaceted, non-judgmental model of them. What does multifaceted mean? Multifaceted means that you see all the different sides of people. And one really effective way to do this is to watch people and pay attention to how they react in a really diverse set of situations. This is my list, the list of situations I like to see people in before I feel like I really understand them as a person. You can come up with your own, but I like to see how people behave towards other people that they have power over. And how do they behave towards people that have power over them? How do they behave when they win? And how do they behave when they lose? How do they behave when they make a mistake? And what do they lie about? This one's always really interesting because people only lie about things that they're scared of. We lie because we're trying to hide something, right? And so whenever you catch someone lying, you're like, that's something they're sensitive about. So you can come up with your own list of situations that you want to see people in before you really understand them as a person. These are the ones that I think are most relevant I've noticed are most relevant. We often describe people like this, right? He is blank. He is really talkative. He is uptight. He is arrogant, whatever the things are. What I would encourage you guys to start doing is describing people like this. He is blank when. And so it's not just that this person has a characteristic, but it's that this person behaves in certain ways in certain situations. So it's not that he is talkative, it's that he is talkative with small groups of people, or he is talkative with people he's just met, and understanding the conditions in which people express those emotions or those characteristics. Just like we pay attention to the impact of people, places, and situations on our own emotions, we want to pay attention to those things on the emotions of others and how that influences other people's behavior. And then most importantly, evaluate people, don't judge them. Evaluate means that you see some quality in another person. Judgment is labeling that quality as good or bad. There are certain characteristics of people that I might personally dislike, say like arrogance. I dislike arrogant people. But there are times when arrogance is a good quality, a useful quality. If I'm working with someone who's arrogant, I might choose them to lead a sales call. I might choose them to lead a team with a really challenging goal. I might choose them to confront an authority figure, right? That there are uses for arrogance. And what good leaders do is they don't judge people as good or bad, but they see people as tools that have a specific purpose. So if someone's arrogant, I've got a job for that. If someone is really uptight, they're often like very organized. So I've got a job for that. And it's seeing the characteristics of people and how those characteristics can be valuable to that person, to the group, to the organization as a whole. And one thing good leaders do is they're not dismissive, they're not judgmental of other people, they're very inclusive, and they see the skills and the valuable characteristics in people, and they understand how to use them in an effective way. Another thing I'd encourage you to do is get comfortable with ambiguity. We like having a fixed sense of who someone is. We like being able to predict other people's behavior in like a limited way. And so we often kind of rush to judgments on people. And then, of course, we get confirmation bias and all these other things that go along with it. I would encourage you to keep an open mind about people. And there are some people where you're just going to be like, hey, you know, I haven't really seen enough of them. I haven't interacted with them enough to have a definitive feeling on them. And until I do, I'm going to be open to new information. I'm going to be trying to understand them. And really, it's not until you see people in a large set of diverse circumstances that you really get to understand them. And so up until that point, don't jump to conclusions. Be okay with ambiguity. And along with that is the idea that people are inscrutable. So we want to understand people's behavior. We want to understand what thoughts and feelings they have that drive them towards those behaviors. But sometimes people's motivations are just utterly, you cannot understand them. There's a person that used to work at Dominican University that absolutely hated me. And I couldn't figure out why. It didn't bother me that much. I figure people have good reasons for hating me. That's all right. And so I just kind of treated her like I treat everyone else, or did my best to. And then after she left, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and they were like, oh man, that woman really hated you. And I was like, yeah, I have no idea why. And he was like, it's because you never RSVP'd to your Google invites, that you would just like show up for a meeting or not, and you wouldn't respond. That is something that I do. And he's like, she thought that was so disrespectful. And in my head, I've got a list of 20 reasons this person might hate me. And that would have never even occurred to me. And so we have this like really strong desire to understand other people's motivations and their behaviors, but sometimes we have to acknowledge the limitations of our own insightfulness or ability to understand other people. So we want to develop a multifaceted perception of people by seeing them in a lot of diverse situations, and we want to be non-judgmental about it. It's not whether we like it or not, it's when will this person's characteristics be useful.